Islamic State's forces on the move. US bombs hit another convoy in Iraq. But what's the strategy? And must Assad now be part of it? Good evening. The scale of the crisis surrounding the ever-expanding might of IS forces has leaders in America and Europe trying to formulate a counterattack without deploying ground forces. After months of allowing the Islamic State free rein in Syria, President Assad is now in action against them. Some in the West are now asking if our enemy's enemy should now be our friend. Tonight we talk live with the State Department in Washington and a general who led Britain's special forces in the Iraq War.
Also tonight, is Vladimir Putin using the panic over Iraq to sow more confusion in Ukraine? His aid convoy of more than 100 pristine white trucks crossed the border today. Kiev and NATO called it a Russian incursion. So what next? The world's trouble spots keep swelling the ranks of asylum seekers, thousands of whom face detention in this country while they wait for their papers. Our investigation has now discovered that hundreds are working for a pittance.
Detainees are cleaning the place, they're staffing the kitchens, they're even painting the walls. And for that, they're paid just around £1 an hour. And we've learned it's happening on an enormous scale.
Apologising for the apology, the League Managers Association regrets calling the highly offensive text allegedly sent by former Cardiff boss Malky Mackay friendly banter. He himself says he's been misunderstood.
I am no racist, I am no sexist, I'm no homophobe, and I'm no anti-Semitic. The people that know me know that.
And from Ferguson, Missouri tonight.
He didn't have a knife. He didn't have nothing. He had his burnt hands.
The voices of the people caught in the headlights of America's racial divide. The threat, say American officials, is beyond anything we have seen, ever. The US Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel painted a bleak picture of the fight against Islamic State forces in Iraq and beyond, while the head of America's Joint Chiefs of Staff called it an organization with an apocalyptic end-of-days strategic vision, which must be defeated, he said. But will that prompt President Obama to ramp up America's military involvement? Here's our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris.
The US is already at war with the Islamic State. The latest cockpit footage revealing a fighter jet targeting what they say are IS fighters in a US Humvee. In the past few days, they've continued to strike targets around Mosul Dam, taking to nearly 100 the number of airstrikes launched over the past fortnight, which the US says has successfully disrupted the fighters' momentum. But now the question is, can and should America do more? If anyone was in doubt of the threat posed by IS, they need only listen to the US Defense Secretary speaking last night.
They're beyond just a terrorist group. They marry ideology, a sophistication of strategic and tactical military prowess. They are tremendously well funded. Oh, this is beyond anything that we've seen. So we must prepare for everything. And the only way you do that is you take a cold, steely, hard look at it and get ready.
It is the murder of the photojournalist James Foley that has brought home to Americans in a sudden and devastating manner the threat posed by the Islamic State, no longer only to religious minorities in far-off Iraq, but to the homeland itself. Breakfast television appearances by his grieving parents more affecting than any hawkish pleas for intervention.
He wanted the world to know how people were suffering, particularly the children touched him so much. And, you know, the more he saw the suffering, the more his heart seemed to grow.
IS is playing on fears that they will not only target Americans in Iraq or Syria, but even on American soil. This tweet, posted when US airstrikes began, showing the IS black flag on a smartphone with the White House in the background. Now, after the killing of James Foley, voices are emerging from Washington calling on President Obama to go further.
This is not going to stop in Baghdad if we don't stop ISIL now. This is going to continue on to American soil eventually. The time to stop it is now. The place to stop it is on the ground in Iraq.
Or maybe Syria. There is an awareness here that hitting IS in Iraq and neglecting them across the border in Syria makes no strategic sense.
Can they be defeated without addressing that part of their organization which resides in Syria? The answer is no.
But what will be the answer from President Obama, the reluctant interventionist? His predilection for golf on holiday, he played directly after delivering news of James Foley's murder, has drawn criticism from even his allies, who accuse him of being aloof and detached at a time of crisis. They warn he must now be as aware of the risks of doing too little as he is of doing too much. Of course, politics aside, there are very good strategic reasons to go into Syria. Firstly, that's where the Islamic State's infrastructure is, where its installations are, where its resources are. And if there were to be airstrikes, they're most likely to target Raqqa, which is effectively the Islamic State's capital. However, you would then suddenly find yourself in an alliance with Bashar al-Assad, which is a very uncomfortable fit. That's why we've seen the Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond already say that Britain will not engage with or work with President Bashar al-Assad. It's a similarly uncomfortable fit for the Americans. But then not only has he shown himself, willing to use violence very cheaply against his own people, but there's a sense that he's somehow playing a double game, that previously he'd been prepared to buy oil from the jihadists and pay them richly for it, but also that he'd been prepared to, if you like, neglect the fight against them in order for them to grow large enough that they became someone else's problem. That is exactly what's happened. Now the Americans are talking about the need to build an international coalition. Interestingly, we know that the Jordanian special forces were in fact involved in the failed attempt to rescue James Foley. So again, the Americans will be going back to the Jordanians, back to the Qataris, back to the Saudis, trying to build up some sense of a regional coalition at least to take the fight to the Islamic State.
Kylie Morris in Washington. Well, now we're joined from Washington by Marie Harf, Deputy spokesperson for the U.S. State Department. Marie Harf, is it possible tonight to encapsulate what the strategy now is in combating IS?
Well, as was just said on the interview before me, we are working with partners in the region, starting with the Iraqis and the Kurds, to take the fight to ISIL. What we need to do is cut off their funding, cut off their operational capabilities, and to really take their leadership off the battlefield. There's a variety of ways we can do that by working with our partners on the ground. You've seen us strike ISIL targets in Iraq already, but we are having a conversation long-term about how to fight this terrorist threat, because it's a threat not only to us, but to all of the different countries in the region. That's a conversation that's ongoing.
But in a way, the only partner, if you're mentioning partners, that is in action at the moment, one of those partners is going to have to be President Assad, isn't it?
Not at all. Look, the reason ISIS has been able to grow so strong in Syria and Iraq is because of the situation Bashar al-Assad has created in his own country. Yes, now on one hand he may be targeting ISIL, but on the other hand he's allowed them to grow and flourish and give them a place where they can really grow in strength and are what they are today because of him. So we are not on the same page as Bashar al-Assad, and we will not be working with him. We will be working with other partners, the Iraqis, the Kurds, other partners in the region on this fight.
But if his planes are attacking in Raqqa, as they have been, and you want to attack there too, or you want to attack anywhere, do you not in fact have to be in touch with Syria's commanders?
Well, we don't think that we are on the same page here. Yes, his fighters have sometimes gone after ISIS, as we've seen, but they have really been the ones that, on the other hand, have allowed them to grow. So we won't be coordinating with them, we won't be working with them. This is really a fight that we have to take on, working with other partners in the region. Again, you've seen us take action in Iraq already, and we're looking at options now for how else and where else we can go after them.
Is there an awareness in the State Department there that ISIS is very much a product of leaving Iraq in a shambles?
Not at all. ISIS as a group has basically been able to grow in strength since what we've seen happening in Syria with the situation Bashar al-Assad has created and the civil war he's plunged his own people into. He has led to a complete security breakdown that has had effects not just on Iraq but on Lebanon as well. So this is a direct result of what's happened in Syria. But what we've said is we will continue working with the Iraqis. We've provided them arms, we've provided them weapons, we've provided them intelligence, so they can also go after this fight. It's the same kind of relationship we've had quite frankly, when countries like Yemen have had to go after a terrorist threat too.
Well, I mean, many people are saying that the murder of James Foley was precisely to provoke America into a response. Isn't the clever thing now at least to get the strategy sorted, to get whatever resources you're going to use? Is there not a danger that you're going to jump the gun, as it were, and really get into another mess?
Well, the president is always very deliberate when he looks at where and how to take military action. I think that's been a hallmark of this administration. So as we determine how to respond and how to continue going after ISIL, we're not going to rush into anything, as you've seen us be very clear about, but we are also, at the same time, very clear that if you harm an American, no matter where you are, no matter how long it takes, we will find you and we will hold you accountable for that. So that is an ongoing process that began with the horrendous and brutal murder we saw of James Foley. We will bring the people responsible for that to justice.
Well, now, America has very strong allies in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia. Together, those states and the Saudis have about 1,700 fighter jets. Not one of them has been out in action. Not one of them is off the ground, as far as we can tell tonight. When are you going to see any kind of support coming from these extremely wealthy and countries which we indeed have supplied with weapons?
Well, we're talking to all of our partners in the region about the different tools we have to fight ISIL. One of the main things we've been doing when talking with the Qataris or the Saudis or the Kuwaitis is working with them to try to cut down on the private citizens in their countries who are funding ISIL. So a large part of what we're doing with the Gulf countries is trying to cut off the funding sources, really deprive ISIL of the oxygen it needs to flourish. We're also working with countries bordering Iraq, particularly, on the foreign fighter network and how we can prevent foreign fighters from being able to go in there and to join the fight. Countries like Turkey, countries like Jordan, and others. So those are all continuing.
Maria Harf, thank you very much indeed for joining us live from Washington. Matt.
Thanks, John. Well, as we've heard, the Defense Secretary, Philip Hammond, has ruled out working with the Syrian regime to tackle Islamic State. But any military action which America takes would aim to deny IS forces a safe haven in northern Syria. IS has its main military base in Raqqa, likely to be the first target of any potential US airstrikes. It's established key administrative infrastructure, such as Islamic courts, in places called Al-Bab, Manbij, and Jarablus. And IS fighters are also advancing on the city of Aleppo. IS controls key resources, including at least 6 oil fields, as well as agricultural land around Al-Hasaka. Now, I'm joined now from Surrey by Lieutenant General Sir Graham Lamb, a former commander of the Special Forces and leading counterinsurgency expert. He played a key role in fighting the insurgency in Iraq in 2007 and was an advisor to US General Stan McChrystal, who headed up the international forces in Afghanistan. Thanks for coming on the program. So, talk to Assad or not? Deal with Assad or not? What do you think?
I think you ought to turn the clock back a little bit here. You know, when you're in a minefield, stop and then tread very carefully. If you look at the options we have, you can ask yourself, what should we do? And then really ask the question that needs to be addressed, what can you do? I sense, you know, just having listened to the rest of the interview coming from the State Department, actually there's lots of good material in there. I recently read a piece, I think it was yesterday or maybe this morning, from General Dempsey as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, again, which lays out a fairly respectable way to address this particular problem. The important thing is to recognize that in 2008, IS or ISI, as it had come out of AQI in Iraq, I think actually by their own words addressed themselves as in an extraordinary crisis.
Right.
You know, 6 years on, that's not the case. What we need to do is turn around and say, how did they find themselves in an extraordinary crisis, and see what parts we can, therefore, deal with that particular problem.
But we also have to try and extricate ourselves from this extraordinary crisis, and it's a suggestion that comes from parts of the Pentagon that they should now be dealing with the very people that they thought of bombing last year, in other words, the Assad regime.
Yeah, I think, again, you know, my view is if you try and rush to solve all the problems initially, then you'll just simply fail. In this case, what we can do, and what we have seen in Iraq, is we've seen, you know, the Grand Ayatollah Sistani come out and clearly drop his support for al-Maliki. Al-Maliki failed to deliver in 2008 an inclusive society with betterment for Sunni, Kurd, and Shia. The failure of that has allowed, in fact, IS to come into the northern part of Iraq. What we can do, and again I would reiterate and support what the State Department lady just said, which is how we work with Iraq, in this case al-Abadi, who's the new boy in the block. Because again, what put the position of IS back in 2008 into that extraordinary crisis was 65 to 80,000 Sunni tribesmen who were now fighting against them.
Okay,
so when we look at Iraq, it's not only just the armed forces, but actually, in fact, the Sunni tribes, the space in which ISIL, Daesh, whatever you want to call them, are currently swimming.
Forgive me for interrupting. You were instrumental, of course, for bringing those Sunni tribesmen on board in the so-called Sunni awakening of 2007. But have we now missed the opportunity to talk to them again? Have we completely lost the ability to inspire any trust in them? And at the same time, do you think that, if we don't do this very soon, that Iraq will genuinely just fall apart?
Yeah, and I think the point is a very good one. The answer is, this time the choice and the option in 2008 was missed. We have another choice in 2014 with al-Abadi. Actually, the price will be higher, the stakes are greater, it is a significantly more difficult proposition for al-Abadi, the new Prime Minister, to take forward. But my sense is that if he looks towards the devolution or the devolvement of power, some fiscal authorities, an inclusive society and betterment for the Sunni population in Anbar in the north, inclusion and how the Kurds and the Shia fit into a betterment of society, then the possibility remains to reenact, much harder this time, in effect, what we achieved in 2006, 2007, in this case. And I sense if you take that air, that oxygen away from ISIL, and contain them, those that are within Iraq. One
more
separation.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, one more quick question. You are a commander on the ground, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. We know that special forces are already operating there on the ground. What other military measures should Britain and the United States and others take in order to win this fight?
I sense that it is the relationship with the Iraqi government with the Sunni tribes, the relationship with the Kurds and our support for them and the Iraqi forces that matter here, and how we can support them. Currently, the intelligence, the ISR, the aircraft, the drones, the strike options are very good. I think the idea of sealing or containing the Syrian-Iraqi border is something which can be done and should be done, because they will move as the pressure now goes from containment to slow to, they start to find themselves losing ground. They will withdraw back into Syria. We should not allow that.
Okay, got to leave it there on that note. Sir Graham Lamb, thank you very much indeed. John.
We did ask to speak to the Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, and to a whole raft of other ministers, but no one was available tonight. We'll have more on how British Muslims are responding to the call for unity against the extremist threat later in the programme. And you can see all our reports and analysis of the IS threat on our website, channel4.com/news. 18 people suspected of collaborating with Israel have been executed by gunmen linked to Hamas, a day after 3 of the group's commanders were killed in an Israeli airstrike. 7 Palestinians were shot dead in front of people who'd been worshipping at a Gaza mosque. Fighting between the two sides has continued to flare. Hamas forces fired more than 80 rockets across the border, one killing a 4-year-old Israeli child. Our report by our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, does contain some distressing images.
Horror always draws a crowd. The aftermath of a killing. 18 killings, in fact. The sign says they gave information about places of resistance, tunnels which were hit by the forces of occupation and caused martyrs. It's signed the Palestinian Resistance. Hamas is calling it Operation Strangling the Necks. People gathered to watch outside a mosque today as the alleged collaborators were lined up against a wall. No sign of a judicial process, just summary execution.
These are the traitors who are killing people. The Jews don't know whether there is a resistance fighter or a civilian in any place. These traitors tell them who's who. They are the traitors on the ground, while the drones are above in the sky.
This is a good punishment. It's a shame to waste a bullet on them. They deserve to be burnt alive.
Masked Hamas members announced the killings in the mosque, It was a decision of military revolutionary courts, they said. Coming 2 days after the murder of Jim Foley, it plays right into the hands of the Israelis. The Israeli Prime Minister turned to Twitter. Hamas is ISIS, ISIS is Hamas, he said. They had made his point for him. Yesterday, Israeli warplanes targeted 3 senior Hamas commanders. How did they know where to locate them? Hamas believes collaborators gave them the coordinates of this house in Rafah where the 3 were gathered. Yesterday's funerals drew huge crowds. If the Israelis had hoped that a month's relentless bombardment of Gaza would reduce popular support for Hamas, this is the evidence to the contrary. Palestinian human rights organizations condemned the summary killings of the alleged collaborators, but their voices were lost in the tumult. More grief as Israeli airstrikes continue. Gazans have gained huge sympathy across the world because Israeli attacks have killed so many children. But enthusiasm for the public shooting of collaborators will not help their cause. Today, Hamas fired rockets into Israel, hitting a kibbutz. For the first time, they killed a child, a 4-year-old boy. Israel's claim to be morally superior has failed to convince many Europeans. But if Hamas had gained any sympathy in the outside world during this conflict, they lost it today.
Lindsay Hulson reporting. Now, it's been a day of apologies in football after a week of own goals. The League Managers Association has accepted it was wrong to describe text messages from ex-Cardiff boss Malky Mackay as friendly banter. Now, the man himself has admitted his language was unacceptable. He was accused of homophobia, racism and sexism. And a warning, this report from Cordelia Lynch does contain some language that some viewers may find offensive.
Malky Mackay was popular at Cardiff City. Now there's a question mark over his future in football and a hard road ahead trying to convince people of his character.
As I said, it was something that was unacceptable. But as far as I'm concerned, I've been in a multicultural football environment for 20 years. I've been involved in it. And I love British football. And I am no racist. And I am no sexist. I'm no homophobe. And I'm no anti-Semitic. The people that know me know that. And I do understand that it's the people that don't know me that I've got to convince of that.
Even the organisation that represents him has revised its defence, apologising for its apology. It was all sparked by allegedly discriminatory text messages between Mackay and Cardiff's then head of recruitment, Ian Moody. When discussing potential signings, one text is said to have read, "Not many white faces amongst that lot, but worth considering." Another appears to make a racist comment about a Korean player who'd just signed. Last night, the League Managers Association described it as friendly text banter. This morning, those words it conceded were inappropriate after a huge backlash.
This behaviour is still okay, and it's still viewed as friendly banter, an awful word which should be extinguished from our dictionaries, because it's not banter. It is a form of abuse. And it's the form of abuse that leads to people getting hurt and people getting injured, and that's led to people actually dying on the streets of Britain at times. So, you know, this is something that needs to be stressed, how serious it is, and dealt with appropriately.
It is language that belongs to another era, but Harry Redknapp still believes Mackay should get a second chance.
But he's not a bad person, he's a fantastic lad, he really is, and you know, as I say, you know, show me someone who's never made a mistake in their life, and I'll show you a liar. You know, it happens, and he's not murdered no one. He's not a rapist. He's not a paedophile. He's made a mistake, a big mistake, but that shouldn't finish his life and shouldn't finish his football career.
Tonight, his contemporary is contrite.
Sincerely apologise for that. There are testing times, make no mistake about that. But I've got values and I've got resilience, and that being the case, as I said, I've got a love for British football.
But he will have to wait to see if there's enough love left for him to continue in the sport.
Cordelia Lynch reporting. Now imagine coming to this country in search of asylum and getting held in one of the many detention centres while you wait for your papers. Now imagine that you find yourself cleaning the lavatories or wiping the floors for £1 an hour, a fraction of the minimum wage. Well, that's the reality for hundreds of detainees every month, working for a pittance for companies like G4S, who run the detention centres, revealed in files released by NGO Corporate Watch. Our correspondent Kieran Jenkins has this exclusive report.
Within the confines of Britain's immigration detention centres, thousands of people are waiting. They don't know when they'll be released or sent away. Some are detained for months, even years, while their immigration status is decided. There's an awful lot of time to fill. You may wonder what exactly goes on beyond the fence in places like this. Well, we can tell you that many who are held here spend much of their time working. Detainees are cleaning the place, they're staffing the kitchens, they're even painting the walls. And for that, they're paid just around £1 an hour. And we've learned it's happening on an enormous scale.
We do everything in here, like all the dirty jobs in here is done by the inmates.
Inside Harmondsworth Detention Centre, we hear from Ralph. He's been in England 16 years. He has 3 British children, but never the legal right to stay. So while you're in Harmondsworth, are you working?
Well, I've got a job. I got the job on Thursday last week, so my job is a cleaner.
How much do you get paid for that?
It's £1 an hour. I mean, that is just despicable. It's appalling. That's a indirect slave labour, if you like, you know.
Under current laws, though, detainees in immigration detention centres are exempt from the minimum wage. It means companies like G4S, MITI and Serco, which run these units, potentially save millions of pounds in wages. Figures seen by Channel 4 News reveal the extent of this low-wage labour across 9 detention centres in the UK. In May this year at Harmondsworth, one of the largest centres, detainees together worked in excess of 16,000 hours. At a rate of £1 an hour for most work, the contractor, Geo, paid out just around £17,000. Had they paid the national minimum wage, they'd have had to fork out over £100,000 that month alone.
I think it's essential to realise that that immigration detention is not supposed to be a form of punishment.
Some might say, you know, so long as they're in there, £1 an hour, so what?
Well, so what is that this figure, this £1 an hour sort of wage rates, actually represent a huge transfer of value, of money from detainees to the shareholders of these companies.
Triness is an asylum seeker from Zimbabwe. She's not allowed to work in the UK, with one exception: the 12 months she spent in a detention centre, working in the kitchen for £1.50 an hour.
They were just taking advantage of the vulnerability of people, knowing that you take the job. No one, even if outside, no one can work for that money. But just because I was inside, I had no choice. I had no other means of getting income.
Nobody from the Home Office would give us an interview. But in a statement on behalf of all the detention centres, they said offering paid work to detainees helps to keep them occupied whilst their removal is being arranged. Whether or not they wish to participate, they said, is entirely up to the detainees themselves. This practice is not intended to substitute the work of trained staff. The man we spoke to inside Harmondsworth disagrees. He has a previous unrelated conviction and could be deported any day. What do you say to people who say it's your choice to work in there, nobody's forcing you?
I mean, I do it to keep busy. Because you go mad in here if you don't keep yourself busy. There are people here who's actually lost the plot. I mean, they actually, you know, insane. You don't come in here and go back out the same way you came in.
Of course, not everyone gets back out. Keeping busy, working for next to nothing. For many, it's their very last act on British soil.
Kieran Jenkins with that exclusive and shocking report.
Still to come tonight. It was born from the racism which blighted this country half a century ago. But as the Notting Hill Carnival kicks off this weekend, in a community transformed, what's changed over the last 50 years?
Our parents were the ones that allowed us to love our culture, know more about what our culture entails, and the fun and exciting things that encapsulate Carnival.
Ukraine has accused Russia of launching a direct invasion of its territory after Moscow sent more than 100 trucks, ostensibly carrying aid, across the border. The US has led international concern in the last few minutes, calling on Russia to remove the convoy or face the consequences. The lorries are thought to have entered the rebel-held city of Luhansk in eastern Ukraine after spending a week at the border. NATO accused Russia of using artillery against Ukrainian troops, calling it a major escalation. Moscow has warned against any attempt to disrupt what it insists is a purely humanitarian operation. Joining me now from Kiev is Sviatoslav Urush, an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and head of a policy group investigating how to respond to the tensions in eastern Ukraine. Thanks for coming back on the program, Sviatoslav Urush. So let's start with the basics. It's not an invasion, is it? I mean, they've not occupied any territory of yours. They've not fired any shots. They've sent some trucks across the border without your permission.
First and foremost, we did have occupation for a long time. We have occupation by many members of Russian military, former or current, of two major.
But I'm talking about this convoy, this particular convoy.
This convoy in itself has been already accepted by Ukrainian government as humanitarian, and it was preceding the process of certification. Russia decided to disregard that and just bluntly sent it over the border, crushing any hope that Russia may come back into the international law system. It disregarded it and it spit on it again.
But when you call it an incursion and other people call it an invasion and NATO gets involved, isn't there a danger that what could still ostensibly be a rather innocent aid convoy, and some of the trucks that I've seen have been empty, in fact, is really nothing more than that, and that the language being used by Kiev and others could actually inflame the situation rather than do the opposite?
The language that Kiev is using is very much a part of a global understanding that countries must obey international law. Russia, in this case, is not exception. It is not an exceptional country by any means. And Russia must follow the procedures, especially set up by the sovereign country, which has, at the moment, to solve its current issues. And Russia disregards that and just bluntly destroys any semblance of a current established understanding that we have sovereignty of nations and we have territorial integrity of nations. And sending trucks over the border is exactly a problem with that.
Okay, so far as we know, these are trucks which aren't carrying arms. They're supposed to be carrying aid. What are you going to do about them now? Will you force them to go back over the border into Russia?
That is exactly what Russia wants us to do. Russia wants us to attack. This is a provocation which may be a part of Russia seeking for a cause to actually invade Ukraine. We will not do that. We will not go with the provocation. And at the moment, you did not see any fire being on these trucks. Moreover, by Ukrainian security service, even despite the recent report that said many of the truck drivers that are in this convoy will actually be a part of the separatist force and are actually an reinforcement for them, is still not affected by Ukrainian fire. And this means that Ukraine is restraining itself not to cause any major international provocation.
And just very briefly, the reason why they came across the border in the first place is that you had lost control of that border post, and therefore they were just able to roll across.
We did not lose control. The border post was overtaken by the separatists Russia has sent, Russia has supported, and Russia has continually declined to take back. And that is exactly the reason why that border post is not under control. And the reason we cannot restore it under control is because the troops that are in the area are coming under Russian artillery fire. That was confirmed by NATO and by US officials many times.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Sviatoslav Urush in Kiev there. Now, for the last 12 days, America has been gripped by the drama unfolding on the streets of Ferguson in Missouri. The trigger, a fatal shooting of unarmed black man Michael Brown by white police officers. The result, an outburst of rage and recrimination along America's most enduring frontline. Race, guns, and the police. The president stayed on the golf course, dispatching his attorney general to calm nerves and seek justice. But the faces and voices on the streets of Ferguson speak much louder than politics. Through the eye of his lens, the award-winning photojournalist John Lovenstein looks back at a week in anger.
I'm just pissed off now. I'm just pissed off. Come on, don't do that. My name is Mike Brown, sir.
Mike Brown.
Mike Brown. Mike Brown. He was unarmed, guys. He didn't have a stick. He didn't have a knife. He didn't have nothing. He had his burnt hands. These guys got nightsticks, mace, all.
Do it now.
Hands up. Shoot. Don't shoot. Don't shoot. Hands up. Get back. Hands up. Don't shoot. Hands up. Don't shoot. Hands up. Don't shoot.
That's it. We got no funds, no good education. All we got is our voice, nigga. All we got is our voice, man.
This ain't the first, this ain't the second, nor the third. It's here today, you gone today, tomorrow. I'm sorry, because he just left my house.
I just didn't like how they shot him down. He was a mentally challenged man, you know, and we need some justice. He used to sell us CDs and on West Florissant. He didn't have a gun. He went in the store, posted, took a soda. Once he got out here, they said he had a pocket knife. A pocket knife, what killed him, made him get shot 6 times.
Shoot, hands up, don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot.
My name is Betty Davis. 2013. Police came trying to break in the house. So my daughter just opened the door and let him in. Hollered at me, made us all go sit down, told us don't move, took our phone, and so they cornered him in the basement. Wherever he was hiding at, I never knew where he was hiding at, he had a knife. A few seconds after he screamed, heard 4 shots, a pause, then a 5th shot. I think I had never seen any. It was crazy to me. I felt like they took all our rights away from us that day. I don't know, I was hoping somebody would help me so I can move forward.
Divided we fall, united we stand. Divided we fall, united we stand.
Get back on the sidewalk or you will be subject to arrest.
A complete and utter annihilation and denial of any First Amendment right. Freedom of protest, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of peaceable assembly. They stepped on every last one of them.
Go your state hearing. Go your state hearing. Go.
They have purposely tried to separate the press from the protesters in order to attack the protesters.
Media, please return to the designated media area.
That's where we can't see anything.
As a former law enforcement officer, I am disgusted with what happened here today. This is our life as Black Americans in this country, year after year after year.
The voices and the faces of the unheard in the United States. And from that to a celebration of diversity over here. The Notting Hill Carnival kicks off its 50-year celebrations this weekend in what's become one of the world's largest street festivals. But it started life as a political protest, a response to the racism in Britain of the 1950s and 1960s. Half a century later, that corner of West London has been transformed beyond recognition. Our reporter Simeon Brown has been finding out how the carnival has changed too.
The steel pans are being prepared, the choreography perfected. Notting Hill Carnival has gone from the margins to the mainstream of British society. And after 50 years, much has changed, with a generation following a new routine.
Our parents were the ones that allowed us to love our culture, know more about what our culture entails and the fun and exciting things that encapsulate Carnival.
In this basement, Notting Hill resident historian Ishmael Blagrove, who has published the history of Carnival, has been joined for drinks by some of Carnival's key pioneers.
Carnival was where we, the people from the Commonwealth and the diaspora, first arrived and met each other here from Trinidad, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Dominica, Barbados, Nigeria, Ghana. We didn't meet each other on the islands, we met each other here.
As members of the Commonwealth, Caribbean migrants came over with full citizenship as proud Brits, but clashed with fascists and the police. The response of Notting Hill's working-class, multi-racial community was a summer party. This was the birth of Notting Hill Carnival, the protest that became a party.
Everybody could relate to the idea of the protest that we mounted, which we created a band, a carnival band, and we call it Jailbirds in Remand. And it was to protest the amount of youth that were being stopped and put on remand and being harassed every day on the streets there, you know, and that was what we did.
1 million people are expected here this weekend. Carnival was once called Mass in the ghetto, hardly a reflection of Notting Hill today. But as the area has become increasingly affluent, the migrant working class communities who built Carnival have either cashed in or been forced out.
The African Caribbean population of Kensington and Chelsea has halved since 2001. And this is mirrored in the Carnival. Steel pan bands, the Caribbean centerpiece, are also down by 50%.
It's the quadraphonics.
And for band leaders like Pepe Francis, who was at the first ever Carnival, that's a problem.
Can you have a carnival without pan?
You could have a carnival without pan, but it wouldn't be a carnival.
What would it be?
I don't know, it would be a festival.
If the steel pans are something old, Carnival's residence in a major art gallery is something new. This collaboration between local Carnival group and artist Marlon Griffith will be exhibited tomorrow at the Tate. For them, Carnival is evolutionary.
Where else in any Notting Hill Caribbean type festival, you'd have the Folkestone Rock and Roll Club, complete with pink Cadillac, and then 500 yards behind that, you have the Church of God, and then another 100 yards behind that, you have a steel band. So that kind of diversity in presentation is unique in any carnival throughout the world.
The eyes of Carnival will be watching over the weekend. It began with politics and calls for equality and community. But it's changing, and with key aspects in decline, the worry is Carnival may continue to grow, but become a party without a soul.
Simeon Brown reporting. Well, let's return now to our main news tonight. And Muslim leaders here in Britain have roundly condemned the murder of captive journalist James Foley by jihadi fighters, calling it totally abhorrent and completely alien to Islam. They've urged local communities to unite against the poison of extremism. Some politicians have called for stricter controls to tackle radicalized young Muslims. But are they missing the point? Here's Parak O'Brien.
Allahu Akbar. Getting a single coherent reaction to events from the disparate strands of British Islam isn't always easy. So today, a whistle-stop tour of Friday prayers, starting here. The Islamic State's atrocities are felt very personally in this North London mosque. These are the sons of Iraqi Shias.
I sometimes feel as if I'm more pained by this event than perhaps the Americans. I feel as strongly as perhaps the family of James Foley who've had to endure such pain, because I feel this is happening in my name.
That's interesting. So you're feeling this in an acutely personal way?
Yes, it's a direct insult to me personally and my religion and my community.
We are sad to see the Christians, the Yazidis, the Kurds, James being killed when they are innocent people. So definitely we should all condemn ISIS, and we should stand united as human beings against the crimes that they have committed against humanity.
We've gone on a mini tour of mosques during Friday prayers in London today. This is actually the second one we visited today. The first one, a Salafi mosque down in South London. The rhetoric there also equally anti-Islamic State. The khutbah or sermon, a fiery denunciation of everything they stand for. Next up, the Sunni East London Mosque, serving a largely Bangladeshi community.
It's against the spirit of Islam, it's against civility, it's against norm, and so there is no justification from any sense that one can do this to a journalist.
The killing of James Foley by someone who sounds British has rightly prompted intense soul-searching here, but our European neighbours are asking some serious questions as well. Estimates in January suggested that up to 366 British fighters were in Syria, some of them with IS. France is believed to have up to 412 fighters there. Germany 240. Adjusted for population size, though, other countries have a bigger problem. Belgium, for example, a country of just 11 million, is estimated to have nearly 300 of its citizens fighting in Syria. Which brings us to how do you stop it? One way to create a coherent counter-narrative. Today, a member of the Intelligence and Security Committee told us that government funding should be used to amplify the message from today's Friday prayers.
If one had an organised and systematic and properly government-funded agency to compile all the statements that have been made, for example, by senior Muslim clerics condemning global jihadism, then that would be a huge resource which would then feed back to moderates in the Muslim community and enable them to fight and win the battle.
Back in North London, they want more than that, a much harder line from government on extremist rhetoric.
I couldn't believe my eyes, but I got a tweet a few days ago of flyers, pro-ISIS flyers being handed out in universities. I couldn't believe my eyes that people are getting away with this in Britain, in this day and age. How is that possible? Why aren't we doing something about that?
There was a feeling here that the real work of countering the extremist narrative was to be done just like this. Not with flash production values or slick media campaigns, but with people just sitting around, talking.
Porrick O'Brien, talking. We're all told to spot the warning signs. Treating strokes early saves lives. But now the Department of Health's drug watchdog says it will review a frontline stroke medicine given to nearly 11,000 patients in England each year. Concerns about its risks have been raised in the medical journal The Lancet. But leading stroke doctors insist the benefits of the medicine outweigh any danger. Here's our science editor, Tom Clark.
If you're unlucky enough to have a stroke, chances are you'll be hurried to a specialist centre like this one in London. The reason for the rush is that these centres can administer blood clot busting drugs early enough to radically improve outcomes for some stroke patients. However, writing in today's Lancet medical journal, a former consultant raises serious questions about the key clot-busting drug alteplase. He and others are concerned about the quality of the clinical trial data used to approve the drug.
What I want is the best care for patients. So if the best care is, in fact, that the drug is found in certain situations to be effective, then it should be given. But if, in fact, careful review finds that there's only limited instances where it's effective or the evidence is inadequate, then it may be there needs to be further studies, or it's possible even that there may be a decision that the licence of the drug will be amended or even withdrawn.
Around 90,000 people in England have a stroke each year. Of those, around 12%, nearly 11,000, receive the clot-busting drug. But there are risks. Between 1% and 2%, up to 1,800 people a year will die as a result of the treatment.
Now, with this hand, can you touch my finger and then touch your nose?
Eddie McLeod survived his first stroke 3 days ago. He didn't receive alteplase, but like many stroke survivors, he's now coping with the paralysis, speech and sight problems that often result. Around half of stroke survivors end up dependent on others for everyday activities. It's why current guidance recommends the clot-busting drug despite the risks, and specialists stand by it.
Patients who come in with really severe strokes, and it's a horrible disease, so paralysed down one side, unable to speak, unable to see properly, all those sort of complications that one sometimes gets with stroke. You give the drug and a few hours later the patient's up and about wanting to go home. Now, it doesn't happen like that with everybody, of course not, but that doesn't happen without the drug. You don't see that dramatic response from being really severely impaired as a result of a stroke and getting better that quickly without thrombolysis.
However, some academics and stroke doctors argue a review of potentially flawed clinical trial data is needed to investigate whether some patients are more likely to benefit from alteplase than others. Today, the drug watchdog, the MHRA, said it would look again at the risks and benefits of the medicine, but said all currently available evidence supports it as the best stroke treatment where appropriate.
Tom Clark reporting. Time for a quick look at today's sport. And on day 4 of the IPC Athletics in Swansea, there were medals for GB's Dan Greaves, Joanne Butterfield and Hannah Cockcroft. World and Paralympic gold medalist Cockcroft won in dramatic style, surging ahead at the last minute to clinch gold in the women's 800 metres T34, an event which she doesn't normally compete in. Dan Greaves won gold in the F44 discus, smashing the European record. Now, where else would you see Kate Middleton trying on a crown while David Beckham and President Putin break into song? If it all sounds impossibly surreal, well, it is. And it's the work of lookalike artist Alison Jackson. Best known for her mocked-up photos and candid camera films, she's now turned her hand to comic opera. It's showing at the Edinburgh Festival, and our correspondent Michael Crick went along.
It's not every day you come face to face with Vladimir Putin, but this is the Edinburgh Fringe.
When you're slightly in unison.
The opera La Traciata is the first ever live show by the satirist Alison Jackson, long well known for her photos and film of celebrity lookalikes in compromising moments.
I'm just working every medium, so I'm taking photographs, I'm filming it, I'm directing the actual scenes, I'm writing the scenes. So I enjoy doing the whole multitask thing, really. I don't think I can really ever do one thing.
From Madonna to the royal family, backstage provided a reporter's feast. Are you actually getting paid, Your Majesty, for this performance?
Of course not. One doesn't get paid for things, I don't think.
And what's your role in this then, Harry?
I'm enjoying my liquor, like I have been in the past. Strip clubs, bars.
High life?
Yeah, sorry, Nan.
I suppose young men will be young men.
Was Prince Philip like that once?
I don't know. He might have been before he met me. He might have been when he was at sea, definitely.
But he's not in the show.
No. I've left him at home.
Oh, we have David Beckham over here. How are you, David?
Very good, thank you.
And how's the football? You been playing much recently?
Well, I retired a while ago, but, you know, you never know. Got my new team coming up in Miami, so, you know, I might get my old boots out.
That nasal voice is amazing. Take a lot of practice.
That's my real voice.
Is it? Right, sorry. Each scene, such as this one with Kate and Pippa Middleton, has lookalikes mostly miming famous arias, rewritten ones. The show's running for just 4 days, with audiences limited to 80. But it's part of a pilot by the producer to transmit Fringe shows worldwide.
This is the first time anybody has really comprehensively arranged that a whole bunch of Fringe shows gets to a huge, wide audience in this way. And that's because of digital technology. It's enabled us to, quite inexpensively, go by satellite to cinemas, go onto internet. The expensive element of it is actually making the shows.
My chance for the doorstep of a lifetime. Mr. Putin, what do you think of Scottish independence?
Yeah, Mr. Kirk.
Are you planning to conquer Ukraine entirely?
Yeah, Mr. Kirk.
Have you got anything to say beyond yet, Mr. Crick?
No, Mr. Kirk.
Still, he said more than I ever got out of Gordon Brown. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News, Edinburgh.
And we're back tomorrow night at 20 to 7. John, are you the real John or are you the fake John?
Well, I noticed they cut round the lookalike of you. I don't know why. I mean, it was extraordinarily accurate, but there it is. You don't get more than Matt Fry here on this programme, but that's Channel 4 News. See you next week. Good evening.
Goodbye.
Expect cool, calm conditions.